Hi, it's Mark Lowe with Kentucky Tennessee Research. This afternoon it's kind of cold and in fact snowing. Reminds me of an event and a night in 2015 where we got 5 inches of snow. And instead of having a regular Genealogical Society meeting, we had a webinar. Wow, back then. So it's a chance for us to go back and look at that webinar and learn from what was discussed, which was about marriage records. What's in a marriage record? We focused on Kentucky and Tennessee. It was a good comparison of the records. So it's a great chance to go back, look at that, and learn from the information that was shared then. I hope you enjoy it. Take a look now. Marriage, though, is one of those vital records that we often use, that we regularly use, and when we can't find them, we get extremely frustrated, I know, as well. But I want to talk to you about what's included in the record and how do we find them, and particularly some things that we might use to search. And we'll keep this fairly basic in the process of us tonight. But if you do have any questions at the end, in addition to me, we've got some other folks on here that can help me answer if I need to. One of the most important things in this process, whenever we're doing any research, is that we develop a plan, or at least we have a direction where we will look for the records that we're trying to identify. And actually, we need to know a little bit about the family that we're researching. Number one, just like real estate, is location. It's prime that we find the location of the individuals, or at least know the general area where they were living at the time that they married, or the potential time for when they married, which ties into the second part of that. When is the realistic time frame to be locating a marriage? It's not likely when they're 2 years old. It would be more likely when they're from 16 to 22, although those ages can vary depending on the cultures and traditions of the time, of the location, and the people. Third, the point of the plan should include what resources are available. In other words, how do I normally find a marriage? Where is that marriage located? Where was it created? Are there multiple records besides just the singular marriage record in the courthouse? Are there alternative sources? And so it's good in the beginning of this to be thinking about where we might locate the record based on the location and time frame. It's also very important in a planning process to have specific questions. In other words, the more specific the question, the more specific our plan can be in locating the answer of that particular question. It's also good for us to keep in mind those people who live around and near and are related to the individuals that we're researching. They can go to church with them. They can belong to a fraternal Masonic organization with them. They could be related to them. They might live next door, around the corner, or up the road. Whether they're friends or related, they often become important in helping us, number one, sort them out, that that's the right person because of the friend or the person that's there. And number two, if we can't find the person we're researching, it's sometimes helpful to look at those connections nearby, and they will help us in that process as well. Whenever we are looking in a location, whether we're familiar with the location or not, it's important to find contemporary maps. And especially in Kentucky, after the railroad, many people chose not to be married right in the area where they lived. They might hop on the train, go across the state line, go 2 or 3 counties away, get married, and then they were still able to return home. The cost of travel was very inexpensive. So it's good if they married after that time period of 1850 and later. We want to have a railroad map if we're having problems finding their location. It's still important to find out where they might have married, whether it was the county seat or a county nearby or a town within the county where they lived, which is possible. I have a map here from davidrumsey.com. You're welcome to jot down that URL if interested. It is really the largest collection of commercial maps that are available. He provides them to us at that website for free for our personal use and study. They're high detail, and he has a wide variety of maps. This is an 1874 map of Kentucky and Tennessee that was published by Asher and Adams. And I find this one particularly helpful because even though it's a little bit out of scale, it does remind me of the cities where people might have gone to marry. You know, people didn't always do exactly the thing that we expected them to do. We also might want to double check the concept of the boundary. And a great website for that is the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries, which is at the Newberry Library in Chicago. There's the link at the bottom, and it'll be on every page here for a little bit. Publications.newberry.org/AHCBP. Now, if you don't want to write all that down, you can go right to google.com and type Atlas Historical, and it fills it out for you almost that quickly, or county boundaries, and you can go right to it. At that point, you want to choose a state, and for our benefit tonight, we're going straight to Kentucky. And generally, when it first comes up, it's going to pull it up as of statehood day, in this case, 1792. It is a modern map, and that's what the light brown and the white lines are on the base of this map. And then the black lines that are drawn over this are the historical boundaries. We can certainly zoom in, zoom out using the tools that are located over here on the left. All of these tools right here will help us adjust the image to our view. This is what we're viewing, this red window right here. So we can play with that a little bit and choose it, what's likely for us. We also have the ability here to change the map date. That's why it says choose date. I've typed that in there. I can actually change the date right here. Once changing it, I click refresh map, and it will change it. It'll change the black lines on top to the date for which I specified. In addition, I can change the layers, although I know it's difficult for you to read at this level. When you actually go to the website, you can show the modern county seats. You can turn off the backgrounds of the modern counties. And so there's several options here to adjust what you want to see visible. Again, you can print screen, or one of the things I often do is capture with a window capture program or zoom in on the particular area. So if we change the date there just a little bit and zoom in just a little bit to South Central Kentucky, this is 1825, June the 1st. Now all I did is change the date and hit refresh. Then I've zoomed in so we can see a little more closely. Again, the white borders underneath are the modern counties, and the black overlay, or the black lines, are the historical boundaries. So in the center there, you see Barron County. To its left, you see Warren County, Edmondson, Hart, etc. And you can see some other white boundaries in there, which represent some modern counties that have either been cut out from these counties or expanded or changed in the process. And the reason for this, and the reason that we need to know this, has to do with the fact that often a historical county boundary might be such that it would be they may be living in a different county than we anticipated. I've had many ancestors that didn't move and county boundaries changed. So often, if we can't find a marriage in the county we find them later, it may be that the boundary might have changed in the time period. So this is the perfect tool to specify a date and determine what did the county boundary look like on that date. Again, we can zoom this in a little more, and you could compare it to a topographic map or other types of geophysical or other maps to help you understand where the county boundaries were. By the way, this is a free site. Nothing that I've referred to you thus far is a commercial site. It's available through the Newberry Library. It's a gift they give to us. So take advantage of this. Let me show you another example of the use of this map here in just a moment, because often many folks who married from Kentucky may have crossed the borders into Tennessee. So again, this is an 1840 region of the map. Same thing. The white and brown underneath of the modern map with an overlay of the black historical borders and boundaries. So you can see if somebody came down from Barron or Allen or even a little bit further over, what counties were in existence in 1840 are a little different than they are today. For example, Smith extended from the Kentucky border all the way down to the DeKalb County border, and that would be different today. There are additional counties in there. There's Macon and Trousdale. So the time period is important in finding the record for which we're looking for. So keep that in mind. Again, publications.newberry.org at the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries. I know that looks a little bit different, but be aware that that is the URL. Atlas Historical County Boundaries Project is what the P stands for if you're really interested and want to know the specifics. The real question for us at that point is what information in a marriage record is provided? And that's going to vary, again, by state or location and time period. Occasionally, information might be inferred, but not specifically provided directly. And whenever we think about a record that we're reviewing, we want to realize what all might it answer for us. And sometimes that's directly there with a specific answer, and sometimes it's inferred or might be referred to in another location. An approximate age of the individuals. How old are they? We may want to know specifically, and it may give us a year, or it may be very specific with a birth date, depending upon the record. Occasionally, we will find a religious affiliation or connection. Perhaps in the record where it tells us where the marriage occurred, it tells us it's at a church. Or who solemnized the marriage? Is it a minister, for which we can determine a religious affiliation for him, and perhaps a connection for the couple and or their family. The other concept there is, where was everybody living at the time of the marriage? Were they living in the county where we're looking for them? Were they living in an adjacent area and cross a boundary? Often the license may give us that information. It may be more specific as to a town or a civil district or a township, and we can refer that and use that information to continue that with knowing, based on the fact that they're there, we might find them in other records as well. We also have to sometimes consider the fact that a marriage may not be recorded, either where we anticipated or based upon laws at the time. It may have caused it to be almost out of place. And we'll talk a little bit about that, enough to give you some ideas on maybe where we can go look further. I know that we often go look at marriages. It's one of the first things we collect as researchers. And that makes sense, beginning perhaps with our parents or our own marriage, those things that we have right at our hand. But we have to remember that marriage records have changed over time, and the recording of marriages may look different in different locations and the way different clerks do it. And so it's wise for us to consider, are there multiple records available for every marriage that we're looking? For example, this is a marriage book or a marriage register. This one is a Robertson County, Tennessee record. I just pulled a clip of one from here to show you the difference in records. I'll show you a little bit more. But a marriage book often may have less information than some of the later marriages, and especially loose marriage records. This one identifies the name of the couple and the date. And then on the right in this case, it's really what we would call the return from the minister, the solemnization information, but very minimal information. In the same token, here's a marriage book created by the clerk with just drawing the lines in place with very minimal information. Again, a reference to the dates, the names of the parties, but he does have notes or remarks. You'll notice with the first reference there to a John Mills, the remarks say that his father's consent was given. In this one, affidavit of no parents, or of age. Again, it's important that we get familiar with the record. Whatever we're looking at and using, it's important that we understand how that was recorded, and if there's additional information, where might that be included, or is this all there is? And that becomes a part of us of practicing and seeing what's there. So in Kentucky, the step one in obtaining a marriage license was to obtain a marriage bond. For most of the years in Kentucky, the bond amount was $100, and that is different than it may be in a surrounding state. I'll give you the Tennessee example in a moment. Marriage bond, though, is usually signed by the groom who is applying for the license and his bondsman, the person who is willing to sign the security for the bond amount. In this case, this is a marriage from Warren County, Kentucky for the Commonwealth. He's going to be marrying, Moses Smith is the groom. He's marrying Martha Potter. And James M. Gilmore is the bondsman. You'll see on this bond there's the signature of Smith and Gilmore. The other information is provided by the groom. That's the front of the. This is the front of the bond, but perhaps the back of the bond is even more valuable to us as researchers. The back of the bond often contains, in this case, starting at the top, which way you're following, a date of marriage, the groom's name, his residence at the time, his age, the marriage for which he's participating now, first, second, third, his occupation as a farmer, then his birthplace and the birthplace of his parents, especially helpful. Here's Martha Potter, again from Warren County, age 19. This is her second marriage. Imagine not knowing that or finding that information. It helps us. So she is not, probably not a Potter by her maiden name. In fact, she's not. She's a Gilmore. So that may tie in, and we could figure that out from other records. Again, she was born in Warren County. Her parents were also born in Warren County. Remember, though, this is probably being provided by the groom because he's applying for the license. Again, he might not be completely accurate in all information. Always be just a little bit skeptical and determine if that matches other records as you're identifying them. It does tell us, though, in this case, that they're to be married at Rebecca Gilmore's on a particular date, and then the groom signs, again, the front and the back of the bond in the process of applying for a license. In addition, before we have these in really good books and other information, occasionally we have what are called, the bonds can be loose. A marriage record can be loose, whether it's the license, the bond, or a return. And the example here is a loose return made by circuit riding minister Benjamin Ogden, where he married Sally Tooley and Jacob Lurton in Jefferson County. And you'll notice a pencil date at the top. That was added on later. That was not written at the time this record was created, because there is the date right here of the time of the reference. So again, these types of records that are contemporary with the time of the marriage may not survive, but when they are extant or do survive, many of them hopefully have been microfilmed, but it's always worth checking to determine where they are. Now, I might make a note for those of you that are researching in Warren County that a large group of our loose marriage bonds, loose records like this, were kind of cast away and saved by some people and taken. They're at the Kentucky Library and are available for us to use there. Otherwise, those would have been lost. So again, they may not be extant in the area where you anticipate. For example, the courthouse. They may be somewhere else, and hopefully, well, we can use some finding aids to determine the proper location to find these records. There are many records for Kentucky and other states available at FamilySearch.org or FamilySearch.com. They both work. It could include, and I use some Nelson County examples here of a couple of loose records that are online for John Anderson and Catherine Bishop. And you can see the records. It's a good way for you to study what the records look like without having to go chase them down. You can actually look online and observe some of the records. The records that have been digitized and are available includes bonds and license, the whole certificate, and returns from the minister. And again, looking at the record, this is a loose record, but there may actually, the same information might have also been recorded in a book from Nelson County. So again, we can compare and look at the two pieces of information. For example, here's the bond book. So they have a separate bond book in Nelson County, and here again is the marriage of John Anderson and Catherine Bishop from 1850. So it's worth our effort because it contains different information. In this case, it does have the bond's signature, the bondsman's signature. So if we're trying to find out a lot about our families, and it's probably wise for us to learn as much as we can as we're building the information, are there multiple sources that contain marriage information? And there are. follow each one. So for the same thing, here is the marriage book or marriage register that contains that same marriage. Many of these registers may have been created from the loose records. So the loose records are the contemporary record, and then they're copied into the book, or vice versa. In some cases, the book is the contemporary record, and they just copy everything onto the loose as they're creating them. But there's the same marriage, underlined in blue, from Nelson County. You see that those are three pieces of information from three different sources, all related to the same event. So what we have to remember, are there multiple pieces that we need to try to gather? And if there are, they contain obviously different pieces of information. They contain different amounts of information. Now let me show you very quickly, if you're not aware of how to locate these, by going to familysearch.org or familysearch.com. I did both to show you they both work. This is the basic page. There will be more at the bottom, but if you look at the top, it will give you a choice at the top to go to search. And if you just click on search, it'll drop down with a menu, but if you actually click on the word search, it will take you to the next page. You don't have to panic. You don't have to wait. Just click on search. It will give you some options there, and it will show you options to search in records, which will be the default. You can search through family trees. You can search through the catalog, which you need to learn about if you haven't. You can search through some books that have been digitized and are available, or you can search through a help information, which is a wiki, with maybe it'll tell you more about the area you're researching or other records as you're defining. But right now, we're going to stick with records. So if I had clicked on search to start with, I'm going to this page. Secondly, I'm going to search on North America. This is the continent right there, and actually the United States is slightly different. So I'm going to click right into that area. That will take me to a page more specific, and actually will pop up with a little box right over that map, and I can scroll up and down using this this little slider bar right here. And in this case, until Kentucky shows up, I'm going to click on Kentucky. At that point, this box will pop up. It will show me the number of available online collections, the time period, images, and index. But there'll be the word Start Researching in Kentucky right here. And if you click that, it will take you to the next page. So that's how you get into these for whatever, same thing for whatever state you're looking for. At that point, it's going to show you the collections for Kentucky, those that are indexed, and if you scroll on down, it'll show those that are imaged but are not yet indexed. Okay? Unfortunately, Warren County is not currently online within these records, either by images or indexed for marriages. They are for wills and some estates, but not for the marriages. Now, there are some in the index, and I want to show you the difference between the two. If you bear with me, where the red arrow is, that is the images of marriages. That's because there is a camera there indicating images have been included. There is an index listing right here that, because there's no camera there, it indicates it's just an index. And it includes many more counties, and in fact, does include a lot of Warren County references that you could use to find the reference and then go find the book, either at the Kentucky building or at the Family History Center. It's always a process. Now, for other locations, if we're looking for images, you would choose the Kentucky County marriages. There's the date, current date range for that. And then if it's indexed, and most of them are currently indexed, you could type the names in there. And I just put a sample name in there, James Martin. And you can search on for it. I want you to remember, though, that often names might be unreadable, might be misindexed, and so you've got to try multiple options, including you can actually browse through the collection. Once they're indexed, it takes you just to the numbers. But in the sets of these records that are not yet indexed, that are just images, it actually shows you the counties. And then so if you're aware of the proper time period or book, you can still page through and find the appropriate record. And we've shared that in previous classes with the society before. So I think you might be aware. Okay. Also, I mentioned the fact that there is a catalog collection. I just want you to be aware that you could go and determine, what might have been microfilmed and what's available. So here's a listing of the marriage records, or vital records, identified for Warren County, Kentucky. Some of those are published books. Others include listings of from the county court clerk themselves. And so you could actually look at that. If it had already been digitized, when you clicked on the appropriate title, it would come up with a bright red thing showing you, hey, these records are online. Click here, and it would take you back to the images, just like we started looking at just a moment ago. So it's fairly easy at pointing you in the right direction. If you use the one above that did not have images, as I indicated just a moment ago, Kentucky marriages with the dates that are a little broader, 1785 to 1979, as an index, you can actually then type in the name. Remember I showed you Jacob Lurton and Sally Tooley? So if I type it in there, this is what's reported. The information right here is what's reported. And as you read through that, this database has been created as an index. It gives you the date of the marriage, the county or reference in regard to that. A little bit lower, it has the source of that information, often including the book and page number. So if you look over there, for example, 482706, I've kind of drawn a red arrow from the right. That is the microfilm number of the Family History Library film. It's in Book 1, page 18, 18B, where it shows the loose record in the microfilm process. So, for example, you could make a decision if that's the one you needed and you found the index, then you certainly could use the local Family History Center. You could order the film using that film number, and then it's in Book 1, page 18, 18B, on that film itself. So that's one way to use the index. The film itself, for example, if we'll ask Gail in a minute if she has all of Warren County's marriages. They may not, but if not, if they're already at the Family History Center here, which is on Morgantown Road in Bowling Green. I'm sorry. Off of Small House Road, in that area where the church is located. Then you order the film through FamilySearch.org. You can rent it appropriately through there, and then have it delivered to the Bowling Green Church or the Family History Center. And that may be some point in time we might actually could do a little more class about how to do that. In addition, though, since this is Jefferson County, you certainly could access this at perhaps another library, certainly Louisville Free Public Library, or even at Frankfort at the Kentucky Department of Library and Archives, who tends to have more of a collection of records across the state. So again, think about where they are in the process. In addition, if you were flying out to Salt Lake City and you were prepping a trip, that would be the number that once you went to the Family History Library in Salt Lake, you would access that microfilm by that number, and you actually pull that yourself. So anyway, that's a thought of process if you're doing lots of work and you want to access these records. And again, if you went to the microfilm, there is that loose record that we just referred to. And notice that on the record itself, other than the date, it doesn't refer us back to where it was filmed. So it's very fortunate that that survived, is available, and that we can access it through microfilm today. Now that does throw us into an issue of sometimes when we can't find a Kentucky marriage in particular, it may have been if the family were Methodist, or if they just allowed a Methodist minister to marry them, that it might be that the record would have been found, might have been filed where he was traveling as opposed to where he was at that moment, because they rode in a circuit. Now, Gail's sending me a message, and I'm not sure in regard to tell me where I was incorrect, Gail, so I can explain it. I can't. Based on the time, it didn't tell me at that moment. This is kind of going to be odd doing this because I can't get the instant messaging. So, but anyway, if you have a circuit riding minister or a Methodist family, it's very possible that within his travels, he may have recorded it in an adjacent county or somewhere else where he was traveling, and you might be looking in the wrong place. So with the Methodist in particular, we might have to consider looking in a different location. And let me show you an example of that. Okay, Gail was telling me when I asked the question, did the local Family History Center have all the Warren County marriages? Her answer is no. They do have the index, but they have other counties certainly. But if you're in Warren County, those should be at the Kentucky Library. Now I'm talking about Warren County, definitely at the Kentucky Library, and also at the county court clerk. They're going to refer you to the microfilm there as well. Thank you, Gail. So if we're back to the Methodist for just a second, here's an example of Joseph Bledsoe, originally from Sumner County, Tennessee area, who was a Methodist circuit riding minister who traveled really all over northern what is today Tennessee and Kentucky at the time. And you might see lots of names there really from the time of July of 1785 until February of 1786 that he's recorded. And these are throughout his district. They're not all in one county. And he recorded these returns or this reference in Lincoln County, which is one of the original county. But all of these did not occur in Lincoln County, Kentucky. At least 3 of them occurred in Tennessee. So again, if we can't find someone there, a Methodist, we might have to determine that the circuit riding minister, whose residence at the time would have been Lincoln County, might have recorded them in Lincoln County. Okay? Makes it a little harder for us. But the point is, if we can't find one, there's one of the alternatives often to find the marriages for us in that case. Now, to give you a comparison of what it looks like to look at Kentucky marriages versus Tennessee, I wanted to pull one example and show you that reference. It helps you get in mind we have to get used to the record where we're researching because they're very different. The laws may be different and the application process might be slightly different. So in Tennessee, this is a marriage book, okay? A full book for Eugene Payne, a person of color, and Lizzie Carter, also a person of color. And so you can see that reference in there as well. There is a bondsman. And so that's the whole book. So let's break it down so you can see the individual sections. So in essence, we're doing 3 forms in one place. Now this is from Holston County, very similar. I want you to see that many of the books actually contain like the 3 documents that would have been loose all in one place. So as we look at that, it's worth our time just to slow down and examine the record to see, is this a combination record like this? And they might be in a slightly different order, okay? So don't get too rushed sometimes. Allow yourself time to learn a little bit about the record. If we go back to the Payne record, I've highlighted just each section. So at the top of that record is the license. And that is the part after the bond and the application process. This is the actual license that they can use to get married. Okay? This is that process, and now they can get married with this. That's the license. Notice it contains no information like the one that we looked at for the bond for Kentucky. Tennessee marriages just don't have that same information. Occasionally it'll have an age and a little bit of information, but the law just didn't require it. So again, depending upon your research, that may vary greatly. On the same page of that book, here is the bond for Eugene Payne. His bondsman is J.B. Tate, and we should always consider the relationship between the bondsman who signs that bond and the couple. It might be her brother, it might be her cousin, it might be his best friend or any other, but determine the relationship if possible. I also underlined in red, because I wanted you to be aware of it, that the bond for Tennessee was $1,250. That's much higher than the $100 that's required for Kentucky. It did not have to be paid. That was not the cost of the license. It was a bond that signature bonded them to, and that in both cases is used to show that the groom believes that they can conduct a valid marriage and enter a valid marriage. And this money that would be bonded if the bride found out that they were not eligible to have a valid marriage, it's what would create in the process the ability for her to have a suit to file against the groom. And that's the only person that can do that. Nobody else could file except the bride in regard to that marriage. Okay, and that's part of that marriage. That's that book. So we've got the bond and the license on one page. So we should suspect to find, just like we did on the others, the return. And here's the return of that marriage that was written at the bottom, signed by the Justice of the Peace, Thomas Babb. And the date. Now remember, this was all on one page within the book. But let me point out here, it might be wise at times for us to investigate the JP or the minister, whoever solemnized the wedding, if we're having problems finding parents, if we're having problems finding location, if we're trying to find more about them. Certainly a JP will be in a given district of a county, and that'll help us with location. A minister, we can research in regard again to his religious affiliation, see if they're members or their church records, or perhaps that will connect us back to another location from whence they came. Always look at multiple records though, because sometimes the record based on the time period might contain tremendous more information than normal. Here again is a marriage record from Tennessee that I just showed you, typically does not contain information. But this book was printed in Nashville, where a large number of the books were printed for Kentucky and Tennessee, large printing company. But what they did is, when they were setting this up, they used the Kentucky license form instead of the Tennessee license form for the most part. They got the bond right, but they added information. I've kind of enlarged that at the bottom in regard to the couple themselves, where they were born, the place of marriage, their ages, things again that were not required by Tennessee law. In fact, let me expand that page just a tad more, because it actually had that also bottom column saying that the residence was Pembroke, that the bride is a wheelwright, H.C. Crunk affiliated, and there are the witnesses present at the marriage. It also tells us the birthplace of both the bride and the groom. Again, sometimes we find more, and it would not be wise for us to skip that. Now again, that bond, the bond of that amount is there in case they go into court, and it would be a damage for the bride. So if the bride sued the groom saying, hey, we don't have a valid, we can't, for example, if she found out he was already married, if she found out he had been in the penitentiary, or maybe currently in the penitentiary and came and married her, she's the only one that can obtain the part of the damages. So, and he would be responsible for paying them. If he didn't pay them, if he didn't have the money, that's what the bondsman, the surety for that bond, would fall upon him. The cost of the marriages, the license itself, is usually 50 cents to $1 to $2 by 1910. So it's not a large amount, and that goes to the county. The county court clerk certainly records that information. But if the bride finds out that the groom who's obtained the license, that they could not have had a valid marriage, she and only she could sue. Might be a best friend or next friend that helps with the case. Those damages would come out of that bond money, so that would go back. If they didn't marry, there are no damages, and it's null and void. So she can't sue after the fact, only if they marry. Right? You guys are asking good questions. Thank you. Keep me on track. I wanted to show you another example because we often research in multiple places. And here's a North Carolina, again, full page that includes the same information we looked at. North Carolina does ask more information, and so it does include name, location, where they're from, their age, their race, the parents, and the parents are named, the status of whether the parents are living or not, and the bride, and then the same information about her family, so groom and the bride. And then the balance of that what we would call the return and information, includes when it occurred, where specifically it occurred, and the witnesses and addresses of the witnesses. So again, it's worth our effort to look at multiple marriages if we're looking in other locations to know what is likely to be found, so that we're trying to dig a little deeper to make sure we obtain the right information. Sometimes there is what's called the original marriage license that would have been given to the couple. Some states actually made these kind of colorful so they could be framed. So here's an example of the color copy of an original marriage license that was to be given to the couple that somehow just either wasn't picked up or was left at the clerk's office. It doesn't contain a lot more information. In fact, it's very minimal. But in some cases, if we had lost the other record, this would help us to piece together the details and information. So I always kind of determine, are there other things out there? Are there miscellaneous, which is the all catchword for whatever else there is, available that we haven't thought about in the process as well? Again, always check all three records, because as I showed you, if you had only pulled the loose records on that Moorfield marriage, that's the one I showed you that had all those extra pages at the bottom. If you'd only checked that, you would have not found that data. It was not written on the loose records. It was only written on the page, because that was the only thing that was actually printed in error by the printer, was the full page. And so what they did, the clerk copied it for about a month. So it's only marriages for about a month, when they realized, oh, we don't have to do that. And they left them blank the rest of that book. So again, it's a special thought of looking and identifying, identifying the process. Now, since we're talking about Kentucky, I do want to remind you that in 1851, what we call the Sutton Laws were created or were passed, beginning in 1852. And we have a double listing of marriages in some counties, because the county court clerk, really the assessors of taxable property, were the ones, as they were creating the assessment list, were called upon to report any births, marriages, or deaths that occurred within their respective districts. They would report those to the county court clerk. There was a fee to be paid. So for example, in some counties, we have the marriage books that exist that show the marriages in that time period, and we might have the listing of the Sutton Law marriages that show that marriage as well. For example, I live in Springfield, which is in Robertson County, Tennessee, 11 miles from the Logan County border. And so in Logan County, we have certainly the marriages that occurred in this time period, but many of the people who married in Tennessee lived in Logan County, and so their marriages are recorded here for the marriage, but in the Sutton listing in Logan County. So again, this law created a possibility of multiple registrations. And hopefully, it's much better to have a multiple registration, right, than a no registration. So again, that creation of the possibility. It's also important for us as researchers to be aware of record types in different jurisdictions. And if you are doing any African American research, you need to know that at the time of the Civil War and in 1863, Kentucky required that those marriages that occurred during slave times needed to be re-registered to remain valid. In Tennessee, that was not the case. The Tennessee law said all marriages that had occurred in slave times are declared valid and require no additional registration. So we would find those books. They're often called Freedmen Declarations or declaration books. Usually might be found as Negro marriages or black marriages or colored marriages. And that's the time period that we create that segregated the two-book system. But again, it's a different looking marriage, because it's not a contemporary marriage. It's a recording of a marriage in the past. For example, here's the Harts there, who had been married for 17 years. This was recorded in 1873. So actually they'd been married much earlier, but because of the law, this was required for them to maintain a valid marriage. We also had those freedmen marriages in Tennessee, but since we didn't require them, there's not as many. If it was recorded by the Freedmen's Bureau itself, for example, it might actually show all of the children that couple had had and their dates, in this case, supplying of information about their ages within that listing. So again, this is a marriage record. So being aware of what might have existed at a particular time and reference. I also pulled one from another location just to show they might be slightly different, but it's always wise for us to be aware of what's there, what's the possibility, and what might we use to help us in our research. You know, without a plan, we often get discouraged, we go the wrong way. And it's so important to think about that location, the resources, the identification. And very quickly, I want to look at some alternate sources. We'll do this fairly quickly. And I want you to be thinking about them. I won't go through each one and look at these, but I believe it's important in the beginning of our research as we're thinking, this is where this record is likely to be, that it's good for us to go ahead and slow down just a little bit and think, if it's not there, where will I look next? So in essence, we're creating the sub-plan often before we get going too far. So think about that in the process. What other things might help us? If you're following along with records and you're doing Warren County research, look over in the chat box right now and jot that down. William, who has been helping over in Folklife and Manuscripts, has indicated that Manuscript 230 is a collection of the Warren County marriages. And so there are other county records there, but he's giving you that number, Manuscript 230. So if you're interested in finding the Warren County loose marriages that I talked about, they're Manuscript 230. Thank you, William. So look at that alternate source list there. It could be others than that. And this is a church record. So this is different. This would be two different things, okay? And so is there a church reference or a church record as an alternative? Depends on the group. This is a pension application for an individual out of record group 15 at the National Archives. And if you look right here in the middle, John's mother was Sarah Wright. I married her on Saturday in October about 1844. And he goes on to describe the fact that where they were married on the farm of Dr. White, about 5 miles from Lebanon, Tennessee. And here was the minister, Benjamin White, person of color. Again, some of these references might be in a narrative or a manuscript or some other source. Consider the alternatives from the beginning. If you can't find what you're looking for, where might I look next? Okay? Some marriage records might find a reference that will require closer read. Let me see if I think I can zoom in and change the color on that. Okay. This is a marriage bond from Tennessee, and it was not issued. The clerk in every state where the clerk's responsible for marriage is to be the determinant of where a marriage should be issued a license. In this case, I don't know exactly what happened, but the clerk did not issue the license. It was canceled. He said girl kicked while issuing license. I don't know whether the girl kicked the groom, whether the groom was kicked by the girl. I do know he did issue a license. I also know they went to an adjacent county and they still got the license. But sometimes things are written into the book that are worth further investigation. By the way, this couple then divorced within a year. So there were problems from the beginning. Remember, too, that there are other alternates that give us information about whether a person was married. May not tell us the detail. We're all familiar with death certificates. Here's a death certificate. And if you look up here, at the time of his death, he was married. So we would find that in other sources. But, you know, often these things are right in front of us, and we miss seeing the basic information. An obituary of the time might indicate the name of his wife. Let's see, he died in 1925. So in the 1920 census, they might be living together. Again, we could check additional records. And I know you know how to do that. I'm just trying to get us to be really aware of not missing the information. There are more newspaper databases available for us than ever before. And rather than go through those, just know that local papers exist. If we have a date, we can pull that information or find the data about a couple in a newspaper. So here's certainly where the Chester Wilson and Flora True were married on happy marriage. But here's an obituary that also includes marriage information. In about 1860, she was born in Warren County, but in 1860 she married James Coleman. They had 2 sons. So again, as folks travel and migrate to other places, it still may give us the information we're looking for. And think of the alternates in the beginning. Think of the alternate locations. Now, this is kind of an odd and kind of sad in one sense, but here's a record of a marriage. It's a gravestone in Warren County up in Berea Christian Cemetery and in the eastern part of the county. MJ, the wife of W.N. Martin, this is actually one of my relatives, gives her birth and death date and that she's the wife of W.N. Martin. We could track her down, but I sometimes wonder the possibility of why he didn't pay the extra inscription cost to get her name spelled out, Mary Jane instead of MJ. And this, look at the date of her death, 1881. So, you know, go back to the 1880 census, remember? Kentucky's 1880 census is the one that's initials because that's the duplicate copy that survived, not the original. So it just says MJ2 or MJ. So that process of using the records, what are the alternatives? Certainly I could track it, but using a gravestone is another way to match the marriage information. So much there. One of the records that's available in Tennessee fairly regularly, it's a little tougher in Kentucky, but there are school census records. And this one gives us information about actually couples who are raising children, whether they are the parents of the children or the grandparents. It gives us the information so that we can use that as a couple living together with birth dates and information. Whatever we need to do to relate a couple, put them in the proper information, we want to use it, whether it's a marriage record, an educational record, or some other source. For example, many cases when marriage records have been lost, they may still contain what they call the cash books or the probate books. The word probate means record or to record, not death. And often when a deed is recorded and the fee is paid, it's written in a probate of deeds book or a cash book. In this case, you'll see I've highlighted where John Terry paid 50 cents for a marriage license for him and Sally Ann Baxter. Henry Fort did the same thing for him and Mary Knight, a 50-cent fee. So if those books exist or the cash books exist and the marriages are lost, we can at least get the date and the couples. Well, we can't see the solemnization or prove that the marriage was actually finalized, but it's a much better record in the case where something is lost. So consider that. I'm always about finding what's missing and figuring out what else is there and how I might be able to locate something that just doesn't meet the needs in other possibilities or other process. Now, let me go back just for a second. I know somebody missed a slide, and I don't know if I can find the right one. And what I'll do is make these slides available to all of you. If you don't find them here shortly when I send you a link, let me know. And does anybody have any questions? If you do right now, it's the time to send them to me on the chat. There is my email address. If you would prefer to email me later, just drop me an email at that email address at the bottom of that page. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I'll look for those questions here real quickly. And by the way, I will save the chat information for those of you that ask questions or provided information. When I save this, I will also save the chat log so that I'll have that information. But thank you for joining us within that reference. And Sandy's adding some other notes about looking in circuit court records for lawsuits, those marriage references. Yeah, this is just the beginning. Nancy asked, how often do these webinars appear? Nancy, this is the first webinar that the Southern Kentucky Genealogical Society has actually done, and we're doing it because we were meeting tonight and it snowed. And so I just suggested that we do it this way. So, you know, great opportunity for us to meet where we couldn't meet. We have the potential to hear all of you and see all of you, but sometimes that gets it a little complicated. we might try this again, and certainly glad to have all of you here. Glad to have Sandy with us. And now, Sandy, you know how this works. We can do this with you and other folks as well, and you can stay at home. We might not have to drag you to Bowling Green to ask you questions. So thanks. We'll try to let you know. Those of you that followed us from Facebook, thanks for coming over. Thank you particularly to the Southern Kentucky folks for being here. And thanks a lot for William Sledge for being our president for 2015. And with that, I will let you guys go for the evening. I will shut this down in just a minute. Oh, we even have an archivist from Houston County. Thanks, Melissa. Glad to have you with us. So we're more than welcome to have you join us at any time. I'm sure we'll do more of these in the future. So everybody stay safe. Have a great Tuesday and keep on researching. Take care. Bye-bye.